After his wife died, Ethan Walker, a quiet U.S. Army veteran, believed his life was already over. He wore the same faded multicam jacket, the same U.S. Army veteran cap, the same dog tags that never left his chest. And beside him, always, was Rex, a German shepherd who watched the world like a soldier who never stood down. Then a single letter arrived. Not money, not land, a forgotten house buried deep in the mountains. Ethan planned to ignore it, but Rex refused. What they found wasn't abandoned, it wasn't broken, and it wasn't meant to be empty. As machines closed in and the mountain began to respond, Ethan faced a choice he never expected after war and loss. Walk away, or stay, and protect something bigger than grief. This isn't a story about escape. It's a story about listening and choosing to stay. Ethan Walker left the Army the same way he had lived most of his adult life, without ceremony. There was no formation, no folded flag pressed into his hands, no speech about honor or sacrifice. A clerk slid paperwork across a desk, stamped it once, and nodded. That was it. Years of structure, noise, and purpose ended with the quiet thud of ink on paper. 2 weeks later, his wife was buried. Ethan stood at the edge of the grave in a faded multicam jacket that had seen too many seasons to still hold its color. The fabric was soft at the elbows, worn thin at the cuffs. On his head sat a black cap embroidered with simple white letters, U.S. Army Veteran. 2 dog tags rested against his chest, tucked just inside the collar of his shirt. Regulation. Always regulation. His watch, a large black military-style timepiece, caught the gray morning light as he clasped his hands behind his back. The habit was older than the war, older than his marriage. Some postures never left you. He did not cry. He did not speak. He nodded when people offered condolences, accepted handshakes he barely felt, and focused instead on the sound of gravel beneath his boots. The ground was solid, predictable. Unlike the hollow space opening inside his chest, only one presence anchored him. Rex sat at his left side. The German shepherd was broad-chested and lean, his brown and black coat thick and well-kept. A tactical collar circled his neck, worn but sturdy, the name Rex stitched clearly across the patch. His ears stood tall, alert even in stillness, and his dark eyes tracked every movement around them. He did not whine. He did not pull. He simply stayed. When the service ended, when the last voice faded into the wind and people began drifting back toward their cars, Ethan turned away from the grave without looking back. Rex rose instantly, moving in perfect sync, as if no leash had ever been needed between them. 3 days later, Ethan packed what little he owned into the back of an old pickup and drove north. The cabin he rented sat outside a place called Cedar Hollow, where pavement surrendered to gravel and cell service disappeared without warning. It was small, weathered, and forgettable. The kind of place people passed without noticing. Ethan liked that. He took work wherever it appeared, fixing fences, repairing sheds, patching roofs before winter arrived. He spoke only when necessary. People learned quickly that he was reliable, precise, and uninterested in conversation beyond the task at hand. His days followed routine, not hope. Wake before dawn, brew coffee, feed Rex, walk the perimeter of the cabin, check tools, work until his hands ached in the familiar, grounding way that reminded him he was still useful. At night, he slept lightly. Rex, however, began to change. At first, it was subtle. The dog would stand at the edge of the clearing and stare toward the northern tree line, body perfectly still, ears angled forward, as if listening to something far beyond human hearing. Sometimes he stayed that way for minutes, unmoving, focused. Ethan noticed, but did not interpret. He had learned long ago not to chase meanings that couldn't be measured. He believed in causes, in systems, in facts that could be tested and confirmed. Signs were for people who needed comfort. One evening, as autumn deepened and the air sharpened with the promise of frost, Rex refused a familiar trail. He slowed, stopped, and planted his feet, muscles tense beneath his coat. "Come on," Ethan said quietly, giving the leash a light tug. Rex did not budge. There was no growl, no fear, just refusal. Ethan studied the ground. Dry soil, no scent of predators, nothing out of place. After a moment, he exhaled and turned back. That night, the wind shifted suddenly through the trees. Rex lifted his head and released a low, resonant sound. Not a howl meant to call, but one meant to warn. It vibrated through the cabin walls, deep enough that Ethan felt it in his chest. Then the dog lay back down, calm again. Ethan stared at the ceiling until morning. The letter arrived 2 days later. It was wedged between a grocery flyer and a power company notice, its envelope thicker than the rest, creased as if it had traveled a long way before finding him. The return address read, State Heritage Records Office. Ethan nearly tossed it aside. Official mail usually meant problems. Rex sat directly in front of him. The dog's posture was different. Rigid, alert, eyes locked on the envelope. When Ethan stepped toward the door, Rex shifted smoothly into his path. "That's new," Ethan muttered. He tore the envelope open. The letter inside was brief, precise, and indifferent to the life it was about to complicate. It informed him that Claire Walker had been listed as a secondary heir to a property recently cleared through probate review. Not money, not land, a structure, a wooden house located in a mountainous forest zone. Unoccupied. Long unclassified. No assessed value listed. Only coordinates. Ethan read the letter twice, then a third time. Claire had never mentioned a house, never spoken of hidden property or unfinished business. She had been quiet, observant, curious, but not secretive. He folded the paper sharply. "Coincidence," he said aloud, more firmly than necessary. Rex did not relax. Instead, the dog leaned forward and pressed his nose against the envelope, breathing in slowly, as if scent could explain what words could not. Ethan placed the letter on the table and went about his morning routine. An hour later, when he returned, the envelope lay on the floor. Rex stood beside it, body tense, eyes fixed not on Ethan, but on the forest beyond the cabin, toward the north. For the first time since the funeral, Ethan felt something stir beneath the weight in his chest. Not hope, a question, and questions, he knew, could not be ignored forever. Ethan Walker did not believe in signs. He believed in paper trails, in timestamps, in causes that could be traced back to a decision someone once made and then forgot. Signs were what people leaned on when facts ran out. That was what he told himself as he stood in the small kitchen of the cabin, staring at the envelope on the table. Rex sat at his feet, posture straight, ears forward. He hadn't moved since Ethan picked the letter up off the floor. The dog's breathing was steady, controlled, but there was a tightness in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. Ethan unfolded the letter again. Same words, same coordinates, same quiet insistence. A house. Not money. Not land alone. A structure. "Doesn't make sense," Ethan said quietly. Rex's eyes never left the paper. Ethan exhaled through his nose and reached for his phone. There was one bar of service if he stood by the window and angled the screen just right. He dialed the number listed at the bottom of the letter. It rang twice. State Heritage Records Office, a woman answered. Her voice was calm, professional, unhurried. This is Marianne Holt. My name is Ethan Walker, he said. I received a letter about a property tied to my wife, Claire Walker. There was a pause, not long, just enough to register. Yes, Marianne said. I see it here. Ethan waited. The property was flagged during a routine review, she continued. Your wife was listed as a secondary heir through a family trust on her mother's side. The records were incomplete. Incomplete how? Ethan asked. Another pause. Longer this time. Outdated classifications, Marianne said carefully. The structure hasn't been listed as residential for decades. It fell into a kind of administrative gray area. Why am I only hearing about it now? Ethan asked. Because no one ever officially declined it, she replied. And no one ever lived there long enough to change its designation. Ethan leaned back against the counter. The cabin creaked softly around him. She never mentioned a house, he said. Marianne's voice softened just slightly. Many people don't. Some properties don't feel real until someone is asked to choose. The call ended shortly after. Ethan stood there for a long moment, phone still in his hand. Outside, wind moved through the trees, low and steady. Rex rose and pressed his shoulder lightly against Ethan's leg, a familiar grounding weight. A choice, Ethan muttered. He didn't imagine a future in that house. He didn't imagine escape or renewal or some clean ending to grief. He imagined a question, one he could either answer or carry forever. That night, Ethan dreamed. It wasn't a memory. It wasn't the war. It wasn't the hospital room or the quiet morning when the house had felt too empty. He stood in a place he didn't recognize, surrounded by packed earth and timber beams. The air was cool but steady, not cold. He could hear wind far above him, muted, as if filtered through layers of soil and stone. Rex stood several feet ahead, staring into darkness. Then the dog turned and looked back at him. Not alert, not afraid, expectant. Ethan woke with his heart pounding and the taste of metal in his mouth. Rex sat upright beside the bed, already awake, already watching the door. Outside, the wind shifted. Rex let out a single low sound, then lay back down. Ethan did not sleep again. Over the next week, he researched, not obsessively, methodically. Each evening after work, he sat at the narrow pine table with his laptop open and a yellow legal pad beside it. Rex lay at his feet, ears twitching occasionally at sounds Ethan couldn't hear. The file on the property was thin, too thin. The structure was not listed as a residence, not fully recorded as abandoned infrastructure either. It existed between definitions, its ownership tied to a family trust created long before Claire was born. No assessed value, no market pressure, no urgency. It hadn't survived because it mattered. It had survived because it was inconvenient. That realization settled slowly. A few years before her death, Claire had requested archived land use maps from the county. Ethan remembered the envelopes, the way she'd spread old documents across the table, tracing lines with her finger. At the time, he'd assumed it was curiosity. Claire had always been drawn to quiet histories, to footnotes rather than headlines. Now he wondered if she'd known more than she'd said, or if she hadn't known what to do with the fragments she'd found. Ethan called Claire's mother on a gray afternoon when the clouds hung low and heavy over Cedar Hollow. Margaret Lewis answered on the third ring. "So," she said after Ethan explained, a long breath following. It finally came back. She told him about Claire's great-aunt, a woman the family rarely mentioned. About a property no one wanted responsibility for. About arguments that had ended in silence. "Why didn't anyone sell it?" Ethan asked. Margaret laughed softly, without humor. Because selling it meant admitting it mattered. When the call ended, Ethan sat still, staring at the wall. Rex stood and paced once, then stopped in front of him, watching his face closely. "I'm not inheriting a mystery," Ethan said to the dog. "I'm closing one." That night, he opened the digital paperwork to formally decline the property. Each time he hovered over the signature line, Rex reacted. A subtle stiffening, ears lifting, a low vibration deep in his chest. It wasn't fear. It was warning. Ethan rubbed his face with both hands. He had spent years learning to ignore internal noise, fear, doubt, emotion, until only the task remained. But Rex was not internal noise. He was external data. Ethan closed the laptop. "Fine," he said quietly. "We look. That's it." 2 weeks later, he loaded the truck. Clothes, tools, food for a few days. Rex jumped into the passenger seat without hesitation. As they drove north, the road narrowed and the trees thickened. Cell service vanished without announcement. The world grew quieter with every mile. Ethan told himself it was just an inspection. Rex stared ahead, ears lifted, already listening, and somewhere beyond the curve of the mountain road, something long forgotten waited to be noticed. The road stopped pretending it was meant to be used. Asphalt gave way to gravel, gravel to packed dirt, and finally to a narrow track pressed into the mountainside by tires that had passed too rarely to leave confidence behind. Ethan Walker kept both hands steady on the wheel, posture straight, eyes forward. He had driven worse roads. Rex sat in the passenger seat, body angled slightly forward, ears adjusting constantly. Not nervous, not excited. Focused, like a soldier moving through unfamiliar terrain. The mountains of the Black Ridge Range rose slowly around them, not dramatic, not sharp. They were old mountains, worn down by time, their slopes thick with pine and fir, their silence heavy in a way that made sound feel intrusive. Ethan followed the printed coordinates taped to the dashboard. No signs, no gate, no marker. The house did not appear all at once. It revealed itself gradually. First, a line that didn't belong to the slope. Then a dark plane where wood met stone. Angles where there should have been curves. From a distance, it looked less like a building and more like a scar that had healed imperfectly into the mountain. Ethan pulled the truck to a stop and turned off the engine. The silence pressed in immediately. Rex jumped down first, landing lightly on the uneven ground. He did not run ahead. He circled slowly, nose low, tail still, mapping the space with deliberate precision. Ethan stepped out and took it in. The structure wasn't raised above the ground like a cabin. It stepped backward into the hillside, each level partially hidden by earth and rock. The roof was not a roof at all, but an extension of the mountain. Soil, moss, and grasses growing thick and undisturbed. It didn't announce itself. It concealed itself. "That's different," Ethan murmured. Rex paused near the front, sniffed once, then sat, waiting. The door was heavy, reinforced with dark iron hardware dulled by age. When Ethan pushed it open, he expected cold, damp air to rush out. It didn't. The air inside was cool, but steady, neutral, not stale, not moldy. Stone flooring met his boots with a solid, reassuring weight. As his eyes adjusted, Ethan realized something else. The house didn't expand outward. It folded inward. The walls were a mix of timber and packed earth, smoothed in places where hands had shaped them long ago. Narrow passages angled upward, connecting levels carved directly into the slope itself. This wasn't improvised. It was deliberate. Rex stepped inside cautiously, then froze. His ears snapped forward. His body stiffened. Ethan noticed immediately. "What is it?" he asked quietly. The dog did not growl, did not bark. He simply refused to move farther. Ethan scanned the interior. No loose boards, no visible damage, no scent of animals. He took one step forward. Rex stayed. Ethan stopped. Years in uniform had taught him something simple and expensive. When your point man stops, you don't push past him. "All right," Ethan said, more to himself than the dog. They explored the upper and middle levels together. Some areas were cluttered with debris, collapsed shelves, rusted tools, furniture softened into shapes rather than function. Other sections were unexpectedly clear, organized, maintained by intention rather than presence. The temperature remained constant. Outside, frost clung to the shaded ground. Inside, Ethan's breath did not fog. They reached a downward passage leading to a lower level. Rex stopped again. This time his reaction was stronger. His shoulders tightened. His tail went still. His gaze fixed on the darkness below, as if listening to something that did not move through air. Ethan felt it then. Not fear. Pressure. A subtle vibration beneath his boots. Not sound. Not motion. Something deeper. Ethan stepped back instinctively. Rex did not follow. Instead, the dog turned away from the lower passage and moved upward, past Ethan to the middle tier. There he circled once and lay down against the inner wall, exhaling slowly, choosing. Ethan stood alone near the lower corridor, a strange certainty forming in his chest. Whatever this place was, it had layers, and Rex had chosen one. They stayed the night. Ethan told himself it was practicality. Darkness had fallen. The road back was long. The weather was shifting. But as he spread blankets across the stone floor of the middle level, he noticed something that unsettled him more than any theory. Outside, frost formed before midnight. Inside, the air remained unchanged. He lay awake, listening to wind move through the trees above, its sound muted by layers of earth and stone. Rex slept beside him, breathing slow and even. For the first time in months, Ethan did not feel exposed. Morning arrived quietly. Sunlight filtered through narrow windows, illuminating dust motes suspended in warm air. Ethan stepped outside and found the ground white with frost. When he stepped back inside, warmth followed him like a held breath. He rested a hand against the wall, not warm in a comforting way, stable. That afternoon, Ethan locked the door behind them. He did not say goodbye. As they drove back down the mountain, he glanced once in the rearview mirror. The house receded into the hillside, disappearing without ceremony. But the question it raised did not. 3 days later, Ethan returned. This time he packed deliberately, tools instead of clothes, a coil of rope, a lantern with fresh batteries, canned food. Rex waited by the truck before the engine turned over. The road felt narrower than before, the forest closer, as if the mountain had noticed them leaving and remembered. Inside, Ethan removed his jacket. The air was exactly as he remembered, cool, steady, resistant to winter. He followed narrow ventilation slits cut into the walls, felt subtle currents of air moving inward rather than out. The passages were angled, forcing air to travel longer paths, passive, intentional. Rex followed part way, then stopped again near the lower level. Ethan did not argue. He crouched and placed his palm flat against the stone. The vibration was faint, but it was there. That's enough, Ethan said quietly. They worked until evening, clearing debris, mapping rooms, observing patterns. As light faded, snow began to fall, softly, steadily. Outside, the mountain absorbed the cold. Inside, the house held. Ethan stood at the doorway and realized something he hadn't expected. This place was not shelter. It was a system, and systems, once understood, demanded responsibility. Ethan Walker met the ranger on a morning that couldn't decide what season it wanted to be. Mist clung low between the trees, turning distance into suggestion. The road down from the ridge was damp with thawing frost, the kind that softened edges and made every sound feel closer than it should have been. Rex sat upright in the passenger seat, ears forward, eyes tracking movement between trunks, as if counting what Ethan could not see. The Forest Service truck was parked half on the shoulder, half on the dirt, its green paint dulled by years of weather. The man beside it stood with one boot braced against a rock, clipboard resting loosely against his thigh. He was tall but slightly stooped, lean in the way of men who had spent decades walking uneven ground. His beard was gray and cut short. His jacket, faded, patched at the elbows, was zipped halfway despite the cold. He didn't look surprised when Ethan pulled over. "You're staying up there," the ranger said, not quite a question. Ethan shut off the engine and stepped out. "For now." The ranger studied him. His stance, the way his weight balanced evenly, the worn boots, the multicam jacket that had seen better years. His eyes lingered briefly on the dog tags, the watch. "A soldier," the ranger said quietly. "Was," Ethan replied. Rex jumped down and moved immediately to Ethan's side. He didn't approach the ranger, didn't retreat either. Neutral, alert. "Good dog," the ranger said. Rex's ears flicked once, then settled. "I'm Gabe Hollis," the man said, extending a hand. They shook, firm, brief. "That house," Gabe said, glancing toward the slope above them, "hasn't had anyone in it for a long time." Ethan said nothing. They walked a short distance off the road where the forest swallowed sound, the way it always did. Gabe gestured toward a fallen log worn smooth by years of weather and sitting. They sat. "That place was built to fight winter," Gabe said at last, "but not the way cabins usually do." Ethan waited. "My father was a civil engineer," Gabe continued. "Cold War era. Didn't talk much about it, but I remember maps spread across the kitchen table. Hills circled in red pencil." He pointed vaguely upslope. "This one was always marked." "Test sites?" Ethan asked. Gabe shrugged. "That's the polite word." He explained that the mountain had once been zoned for experimental structures, prototypes meant to endure cold, isolation, long-term exposure without fuel or constant maintenance. Most were dismantled. Some collapsed. "One," Gabe said, "was just left." Ethan thought of the steady air inside the house, the warmth that didn't fight winter so much as understand it. "They didn't finish everything," Gabe added, "and they didn't erase everything either." Rex shifted, ears lifting sharply. A low mechanical hum drifted through the trees. Distant, faint, unmistakable. Gabe's expression tightened. "That'll be Stone River." Ethan followed his gaze down the slope where two trucks moved slowly along a lower access road. One carried equipment, the other bore the logo of Stone River Resources, a regional geological firm known for buying land that was inconvenient enough for most people to ignore. "They've been sniffing around this mountain for years," Gabe said. "Copper, maybe, or something deeper." Rex let out a low sound, not a growl, a warning that lived deep in his chest. Ethan felt it resonate through his boots. Over the next few days, The pattern became impossible to ignore. Whenever machinery moved closer to certain sections of the ridge, Rex reacted immediately. He refused to cross specific patches of ground, pulling Ethan back with surprising force. At night, he paced restlessly, stopping at the door to stare into darkness where engines had passed earlier that day. Ethan began to mark the areas Rex avoided. The alignment unsettled him. They matched the parts of the house where the air felt heaviest, where the vibration beneath the stone floor was most pronounced. Gabe returned one afternoon while Ethan stood studying rough sketches spread across the tailgate of his truck. "You ever see a mountainside fail from the inside out?" Gabe asked. Ethan nodded once. "A training exercise? Years ago. Pressure released where it shouldn't have been. Men buried without warning." "If they drill into the wrong pocket," Gabe said, "they won't just bring down a slope. They'll destabilize everything above it." That night, Ethan sat alone in the middle tier of the house, lantern light casting soft shadows across the packed earth walls. Rex lay beside him, head resting on his paws, eyes open. "You knew," Ethan said quietly. "Didn't you?" Rex didn't move. Late that evening, a tremor passed through the house. So subtle Ethan might have dismissed it as fatigue if not for Rex. The dog rose instantly and pressed himself against the inner wall, ears flattening, then lifting again, as if tracking something that moved not through air, but through ground. Outside, the distant hum of machinery cut off abruptly. Silence followed. Ethan placed his hand against the wall. The vibration was gone. The next morning, Ethan followed Gabe down to the temporary survey site. 5 men in hard hats, reflective vests. The efficient indifference of people paid to see land as resource rather than home. Their supervisor introduced himself as Cal Turner, clean-shaven, confident, polite in the way of men used to approvals coming before objections. "We're just running preliminary tests," Cal said easily. "Nothing invasive." "Yet," Ethan replied. Cal smiled. "Standard procedure." Rex stayed close to Ethan, body angled toward the slope. "Dog doesn't like our equipment," Cal noted. "He doesn't like unstable ground," Ethan said. The smile faded, just a fraction. The meeting ended without confrontation, without resolution. As they drove back up the mountain, Gabe spoke again. "You understand systems," he said. "Pressure, failure points." "I understand consequences," Ethan replied. Back at the house, Ethan stood in the doorway and looked out over the forest. The beauty hadn't dimmed. It had sharpened. The house wasn't just shelter. It was a warning. And Ethan Walker found himself standing in the narrow space between ignorance and collapse. The sound woke Ethan before dawn. Not a crash, not a shout, a scrape. Slow, deliberate. Wood against packed earth. Ethan sat up on the narrow cot in the middle tier, the house still wrapped in its pre-morning quiet. No wind, no shifting branches, just that sound again. Scrape, pause, scrape. "Rex," Ethan whispered. The dog was already on his feet. Rex stood near the upper level, body angled toward the far wall where timber met clay. His brown and black coat caught the faint light filtering through a narrow window, silvering the edges of his shoulders. One paw lifted, then pressed firmly against the wall. Not frantic, purposeful. "This wall?" Ethan murmured. Rex didn't look back. Ethan crossed the room and placed his palm flat against the surface. The wall felt solid, cool, dry, undamaged. No cracks, no sagging. Nothing that suggested water intrusion or rot. Yet something about it felt wrong. The seams. He fetched the lantern and swept the light slowly across the surface. At first glance, the wall appeared uniform. Packed earth reinforced with timber, smoothed by hands long gone. Then he angled the light just right. A line appeared, too straight to be natural, too precise to be settling. Rex let out a low breath through his nose and pressed his paw exactly where the seam dipped inward. Ethan exhaled. "All right," he said quietly. "I see it." He worked carefully, not forcing, not rushing. Whoever had sealed this section hadn't meant for it to vanish forever, only to be overlooked. The packed clay peeled back slowly, revealing darkened wood beneath, reinforced rather than decayed. When the panel finally loosened, it didn't crumble. It opened. Behind it lay a narrow chamber, barely wider than Ethan's shoulders. The air inside was different. Cooler, denser, untouched by the subtle currents that moved through the rest of the house. Ethan stepped back instinctively. Rex didn't. The dog leaned forward, sniffed once, then sat, alert, waiting. Ethan retrieved gloves and eased the panel fully aside. Inside, stacked neatly against the rear wall, were objects wrapped in oilcloth and canvas darkened by age. Documents. He carried them out one by one, laying them on the table near the window. Blueprints came first, yellowed but intact, drawn with meticulous precision. Cross-sections of the house annotated with arrows and measurements. Ethan recognized the symbols immediately. Airflow channels, thermal mass zones, passive heat capture. "This wasn't a cabin," he said softly. "This was engineering." Beneath the blueprints lay a leather-bound journal. The cover was cracked, the edges softened by time. Inside, the handwriting was tight, disciplined, the script of someone trained to think in systems rather than stories. Lanterns. Noah Mercer, Corps of Engineers. The entries were dated decades earlier. Mercer wrote of isolation tests, of winter endurance without fuel, of building with the mountain rather than against it. Then the tone changed. An error in calculations, subsurface stress, a collapse during testing. 2 men trapped, 1 survived, 1 did not. The project was halted, officially deferred, unofficially abandoned. The final entry was brief. "If this place endures, it will not be because we were right, but because the mountain allowed it." Ethan closed the journal slowly. Rex shifted closer and rested his head against Ethan's knee. "You felt it," Ethan said quietly. "Didn't you?" The dog's eyes met his, steady, unreadable. As Ethan gathered the remaining papers, something slid free from the bottom of the stack. An envelope. Unlike the others, it was newer. Not yellowed, just aged. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Claire. Ethan froze. He hadn't spoken her name aloud in weeks. The way she wrote was precise but warm, slanted slightly to the right. The same hand that had labeled jars in the kitchen, left notes on the fridge, tucked reminders into his bag before deployments. The envelope was sealed, addressed to him. Ethan didn't open it right away. He sat with it instead, elbows on the table, staring as if it might move on its own. Claire had never been careless with words. She didn't write unless she meant it. Finally, he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Ethan, if you're reading this, it means you listened. To Rex or to yourself. Maybe both. This place isn't an inheritance. It's a responsibility." I didn't understand all of it when I started looking, but I understood enough to know it wasn't meant to stay buried. Whatever happens next, promise me you won't walk away without knowing why it was built. See, Ethan folded the letter carefully. The weight in his chest wasn't grief this time. It was clarity. She hadn't sent him here to give him something. She had sent him here to finish something. Outside, the distant sound of machinery echoed faintly through the trees. Rex rose and moved to the doorway, ears lifting. Ethan gathered the blueprints and journal into a neat stack. He looked at the wall, the open panel, the chamber now exposed. This house was never empty, he said. Rex stayed at his side, silent as ever, but no longer waiting. The mountain didn't announce its warnings. It whispered them. Ethan Walker learned that over the next several days, as Stone River's presence grew heavier along the lower ridge, more trucks, more markers pressed into soil that had never been asked permission to hold them. The sounds carried upward, engines idling, metal clinking, voices flattened by distance. Rex heard it all. He stopped pacing at night only long enough to listen. When the wind shifted, his head lifted. When machinery moved closer to certain sections of the slope, his body stiffened. Weight settling low into his legs, as if bracing for something that hadn't happened yet. Ethan watched and recorded, not obsessively, precisely. He marked the spots Rex refused to cross, the places where the dog halted without drama and simply would not move. He overlaid those points with the house's diagrams, the airflow routes, the thermal mass zones, the sealed lower areas where pressure lingered. The alignment tightened into a pattern he couldn't ignore. Rex wasn't leading. He was reacting. Late one afternoon, Gabe Hollis climbed up the ridge on foot, breath steady, boots finding the old paths without hesitation. He studied Ethan's rough sketches spread across a makeshift table. "You're mapping the mountain like it's alive," Gabe said. "It is," Ethan replied. "Just not the way people expect." Gabe leaned closer. "They're escalating." Ethan nodded. "I know." That night the house shifted. Not violently, not enough to rattle shelves or wake the forest below. Just enough that Ethan felt it through the stone floor, a low-frequency adjustment that registered more in bone than sound. Rex reacted instantly. He rose and pressed himself against the inner wall of the middle tier, ears flattening, then lifting again as if tracking movement beneath layers of earth. Outside, the hum of machinery cut off abruptly. Silence followed. Ethan placed his hand against the wall. The vibration faded. He didn't sleep after that. The next morning, Ethan drove down to the survey site with Gabe. Stone River's supervisor, Cal Turner, stood near the rig, clipboard tucked under one arm. He wore confidence the way some men wore uniforms, clean, practiced, unexamined. "We're within our permits," Cal said when Ethan approached. "Temporary evaluations only." "Your data assumes stable ground," Ethan replied. "This isn't stable." Cal's smile tightened. "We've run the numbers. So did the engineers who built that house," Ethan said. "One of them died because of it." That earned a pause. Not enough to stop the work. Rex stayed close to Ethan, body angled toward the slope rather than the men. His ears flicked, tracking something beneath the surface. A sharp crack split the air. Not loud, not dramatic. Enough. The ground shifted beneath Ethan's boots. Rex lunged forward, teeth catching the back of Ethan's jacket, yanking him sideways as the soil where he'd been standing gave way into a shallow sink. Rocks slid. Dirt collapsed inward with a grinding sound. Men shouted. Equipment powered down. Ethan hit the ground hard, breath knocked from his chest. Rex stood over him, legs braced, a low sound rumbling deep in his throat. Not aggression, not fear, alarm. Gabe was there seconds later, hauling Ethan back to solid ground. "That," Gabe said sharply to the stunned crew, "is what I've been telling you." No one was seriously hurt, but no one laughed either. The incident changed the pace. Work was suspended pending review. Engineers were called. Reports were filed. Ethan spent the next 48 hours doing what he did best. He documented. He pulled Mercer's original diagrams and overlaid them with modern survey data. He traced fault lines Gabe remembered from decades of patrols. He marked every place Rex had refused to step, every patch of ground the dog had treated as unstable long before instruments reacted. "You're treating him like a sensor," Gabe observed one evening. "He is one," Ethan replied. "Better than most." They submitted the findings through proper channels. Slow channels. Resistant channels. But channels nonetheless. Gabe made quiet calls to old contacts. People who remembered winters that nearly took them. Slopes that had failed without warning. The house became central to the argument. Not as a residence. As evidence. A proof of concept that predated modern sustainability rhetoric by decades. Engineered earth sheltering. Passive geothermal moderation. Structural harmony with unstable terrain. The house hadn't survived by accident. Late one night, as Ethan reviewed thermal readings against the original blueprints, Rex rose suddenly and moved to the center of the room. He stood perfectly still, then sat. Directly above a section of floor Ethan hadn't mapped yet. Ethan followed the dog's gaze downward. The temperature reading on his handheld device dropped 3 degrees in seconds. Below them, something shifted. Not collapsed. Adjusted. The mountain was responding. The following morning, the county inspector arrived. Her name was Dana Whitfield, mid-50s, short, solidly built, iron-gray hair cut close, a face shaped by years of telling people things they didn't want to hear. "I don't care about sentiment," she said as she stepped inside the house. "I care about liability." "Then you should care about stability," Ethan replied. Dana walked the tiers slowly, measured airflow, pressed her palm to the packed earth walls the same way Ethan had days earlier. "This doesn't behave like a normal structure," she said finally. "No," Ethan agreed. "It behaves like a system." She glanced at Rex, who sat watching her with calm intensity. "And the dog?" "He listens," Ethan said. Dana snorted softly. "Smartest thing in this room." By the end of the inspection, her skepticism had shifted, not to approval, but to caution of a different kind. "I'll file my report," she said. "It won't make everyone happy." "I don't need happy," Ethan replied. That evening, as the mountain settled back into quiet, Ethan stood at the doorway and watched the light fade across the slope. Rex nosed through fallen needles nearby, alert but at ease. Ethan understood then that leaving would not end the pressure. Staying might. And staying, he realized, was no longer about him. The pressure didn't arrive all at once. It came in envelopes, thin paper, official language, phrases that sounded harmless on their own. Occupancy review, safety reassessment, temporary compliance measures. Together, they formed a narrowing corridor with very few exits. Ethan Walker read the notices standing at the pine table, the same place where Claire's letter now rested inside the journal. Rex lay at his feet, head down, eyes open, tracking the subtle changes in Ethan's breathing. They wanted him gone. Not immediately, not forcefully. They wanted him to choose it. Gabe Hollis arrived that afternoon, his truck crunching slowly up the access road. He moved more stiffly than usual, cold settling into joints that had learned too many winters the hard way. "They're fast-tracking a safety evaluation," Gabe said once inside. "Not wrong to ask, wrong to rush." "They already know the answer they want," Ethan replied. Gabe studied the room, The packed earth walls, the way light settled, the steady air that refused to behave like the outside world. "You could walk away," he said. "No one would blame you." Ethan didn't answer. That night, engines echoed faintly from below. Stone River had expanded operations again. More equipment, more markers planted into soil that had never been asked permission to hold them. Rex rose and stood at the doorway, ears lifting. Ethan joined him and looked out across the slope. The beauty hadn't dimmed, it had sharpened, edges defined now by understanding rather than awe. The house wasn't shelter, it was evidence. The meeting took place 2 days later in a county office that smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. Dana Whitfield sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 engineers and a legal advisor whose suit looked new and uncomfortable. Cal Turner represented Stone River, polite, prepared, certain. Ethan laid the materials out carefully: Mercer's blueprints, thermal readings, fault overlays, time-stamped notes marking where Rex had refused to step long before instruments reacted. "This structure predates modern codes," one engineer said. "Codes change," Ethan replied. "Physics doesn't." He didn't argue emotionally. He didn't raise his voice. He spoke the way he had learned to speak under pressure. Measured, factual, patient. "This house isn't resisting the mountain," he continued. "It's cooperating with it. That's why it's stable. Drill where you're planning to drill, and you'll release pressure it's been quietly managing for decades." Cal leaned forward. "That's speculation." Dana glanced at the data. "It's corroborated." Silence followed. When the meeting ended, no one shook hands. No one smiled. The decision didn't come immediately. It arrived quietly a week later in the mail. An amended notice, thinner paper, softer language, rare engineered structure, historical and technical significance acknowledged, extraction activity suspended pending permanent review. Ethan read it once, then again. He didn't smile. He didn't exhale in triumph. He nodded. Outside, the mountain remained unchanged. Trees didn't part. Wind didn't still. Snowmelt traced careful paths down the slope as it always had. The house didn't feel victorious. It felt settled. Gabe walked the last stretch of road that afternoon instead of driving. His gait was slower than it used to be, but his posture remained upright. "You staying?" Gabe asked, as if confirming a fact already decided. "Yes," Ethan said, "but not to hide." Gabe nodded. "Good. This place doesn't need hiding." They sat on the middle tier, sharing coffee reheated once too often. Gabe spoke of patrols he'd no longer need to make, of reports he'd still file even if no one asked. Before he left, he paused at the doorway and looked back. "Some places," he said, "aren't meant to be owned." Then he was gone. In the days that followed, the mountain exhaled. Machinery was removed piece by piece. Bright markers disappeared. The access road grew quiet again, reclaiming its uneven shape beneath fallen needles and thawing soil. Rex noticed first. He stopped pacing at night. The low, restless movements that had marked his sleep faded. He chose his place near the inner wall and slept deeply, legs loose, breath slow. Ethan noticed, too, the tightness in his chest, the one he had mistaken for vigilance, began to loosen. He worked without urgency now, not repairing the house but listening to it, learning its rhythms, how the upper tier warmed fastest in the afternoon, how the middle level held temperature through the night, how the lower stone floor cooled slowly at dawn, releasing yesterday's heat with patience. One evening, Ethan returned the journal to the open chamber, not hidden, but placed with intention. He left the panel open. Acknowledgement, not invitation. Later that night, he dreamed of Claire. She stood at the edge of the ridge, hair loose around her shoulders, calm in a way she had never been in life. She didn't speak. She looked at the house, then at him. When Ethan woke, the dream didn't cling. It passed like weather. He understood then that the house hadn't been waiting for a savior. It had been waiting for someone willing to stay without conquering it. And staying, he realized, was not passive. It was a decision. Winter arrived without drama. No storms announced it. No sudden silence fell like a curtain. Snow came the way it always had in the mountains, patiently, layer by layer, softening edges rather than erasing them. Ethan Walker noticed the change not by temperature, but by rhythm. Mornings took longer to wake. Light lingered lower on the slope before reaching the narrow windows. The house responded the way it always had, without complaint, without urgency. It adjusted. Rex adjusted with it. The German shepherd no longer slept with one ear raised. He no longer rose at every distant sound or paced the thresholds at night. He chose his place along the inner wall of the middle tier and slept deeply, legs loose, breath slow. The mountain was quiet again. Ethan learned to be quiet with it. He did not renovate the house. He did not improve it. He repaired only what needed repair and left alone what worked. Loose timber was reinforced where it had been reinforced before. Blocked air channels were cleared, not widened. He listened. The house taught him how. It taught him that heat rose best when guided, not forced. That cold did not need to be fought, only redirected. That pressure, when given somewhere to go, stopped being dangerous. Systems, he realized, behaved a lot like people. Researchers reached out, carefully, respectfully. Environmental engineers, curious about a structure that had solved problems modern designs still struggled with. Universities sent quiet inquiries. Ethan answered some, declined others. He did not become a spokesperson. He became a caretaker. Dana Whitfield returned once more, this time without her clipboard. She walked the tiers slowly, hands in her coat pockets, eyes thoughtful. "They'll leave you alone now," she said. "Mostly." "Mostly," Ethan echoed. She stopped near the doorway. "You ever think about what happens after you?" Ethan considered the question. "Every day," he said. Dana nodded once. "Good. That's how places like this survive." She left without ceremony. Ethan didn't watch her go. He followed Rex outside instead. The dog trotted ahead with easy confidence, choosing paths he had once avoided. He paused at the edge of the ridge and sat, scanning the forest below, not for danger, but out of habit, out of care. Ethan stood beside him, hands in the pockets of his worn flannel, dog tags resting quietly against his chest. The multicam jacket hung open, faded beyond recognition, comfortable in its usefulness. He understood then that the house had not been waiting for a hero. It had been waiting for someone who would not conquer it, someone who would not extract from it, someone who would stay. Days simplified. Meals were quiet. Movements deliberate. Time shaped by light and temperature rather than obligation. Ethan repaired fences in Cedar Hollow when asked. He plowed a neighbor's driveway without comment. He declined praise. Routine returned, not as escape, but as structure chosen rather than imposed. At night, he sometimes took the journal from the open chamber and read a single entry before returning it. He did not hide it again. He did not seal the wall. Acknowledgement was enough. One evening, as dusk settled early and the forest darkened, snow began to fall again. Not heavily, not urgently. Just enough to soften the world. Ethan sat on the middle tier and spoke without thinking. Not aloud, not in words, in attention. Later that night, he dreamed. Claire stood at the edge of the mountain, not as she had been at the end, pale and still, but as she had been before. Hair loose, sleeves rolled to her elbows, eyes steady. She did not speak. She looked at the house, then at him. When Ethan woke, the dream did not cling. It passed like weather. Just before dawn, he woke to stillness. Not silence, but a deeper quiet. The kind that arrives when something has finally settled into its place. Rex lay asleep beside him, chest rising and falling evenly. Outside, snow traced careful lines along the slope. Ethan sat up and realized with a quiet start that for the first time in years he felt no need to brace for impact. Not happiness, not closure, balance. The house had not saved him. It had not healed him. It had simply created the conditions in which he could stand upright again. And that, Ethan knew, was enough. Sometimes the miracle is not the land, the shelter, or the rescue we can point to. Sometimes the miracle is quieter. It is the moment we stop running. It is the decision to stay.